The thick silver wrapping paper tore with a loud, violent rip. Madison dragged the box over the sharp metal rim of the ballroom trash can. The heavy, suffocating scent of white roses and spilled champagne hung in the warm air. She tossed the heavy box inside, completely unopened. The thud echoed over the soft jazz playing in the background. My own mother stood 2 feet away, her hand resting on my sister's white lace veil, glaring at me as if I were a threat to their perfect family. I was 39 years old, a former clinical social worker and current compliance manager, and I was watching my family turn their backs on me in front of 200 wedding guests. "Save it for someone who cares," Madison sneered. Her acrylic nails tapped sharply against the side of the metal bin. I almost told her it was not really a wedding gift. She turned her back to the trash and grabbed her groom by the arm. Her voice pitched up, carrying easily to the closest tables. "She is jealous. Anything Amanda told you is a lie." I smiled, smoothed the cold silk of my dress, and sat down at my assigned seat. I did not apologize. I did not run out of the double doors crying. I just let her destroy herself. Eli stared at me. He was 42, a widower who just wanted a quiet life, and right now, he did not know which one of us was holding the knife. "Amanda," my mother Linda hissed, leaning over the white tablecloth. "Do not ruin your sister's special day. Just go." I kept my hands folded on my lap. The videographer was circling the dance floor, the red recording light blinking steadily, capturing every single word. Eli gently pulled his arm out of Madison's grip. "What exactly did Amanda tell me?" Madison stepped closer to him, her gown rustling loudly. "She cannot stand that I built a successful family wellness brand while she gave up her practice. She is just trying to embarrass me." A bridesmaid standing near the cake let out an awkward, nervous laugh. The air in the room shifted. Guests were pretending to eat, but their eyes darted toward the head table. At the far end, 15-year-old Sophie sat frozen. She was Eli's daughter. She did not look at her father or her new stepmother. Her pale face was turned entirely toward the metal trash can. Deep inside that bin, muffled by layers of discarded napkins and silver wrapping paper, the box began to vibrate. It was a low, steady hum. I knew exactly who was calling. Naomi, my lawyer, had strict instructions to dial that old phone only if the legal preservation request was confirmed by the wellness platform. The hum was faint, but Sophie heard it. Her shoulders flinched. I did not reach into the trash. The data was already safe. 7 months later, this exact video footage would play in a quiet courtroom. But sitting there under the crystal chandeliers, the investigation was only taking its first breath. The trail of stolen credentials started exactly 11 weeks before this wedding. It was late August. The air conditioning in my office was running on high, blowing freezing air across my desk. My work phone chimed with a message from an unknown number. It contained 3 screenshots. The first message popped up in a gray text bubble. "I think your sister is using your license." My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Dealing with corporate risk management every day made me skeptical. I assumed this was just a teenager acting out. Eli had lost his wife when Sophie was 10. He had been a widower for over 4 years before he started dating Madison. Sophie had known my sister for over a year, and the friction between them had escalated rapidly since the engagement. Madison wanted to be seen as the ultimate healer of their new family. I figured Sophie was just trying to cause trouble to stop the wedding. I replied with cold, professional detachment. "If you have concerns, you need to save those images and speak to your school counselor. I cannot get involved in family disputes." At the time, I thought I was protecting the legal process. I was really protecting myself. 3 minutes passed. Then, my phone chimed again. Sophie did not argue. She did not beg me to believe her. She just sent another picture. It was a document titled as a psychosocial summary. Right at the top, printed in bold black letters, was my full name, Amanda Pierce, followed by my clinical social worker license number. My stomach tightened. I zoomed in on the text. Below my credentials was a paragraph describing a troubled, unstable teenager. The language sounded clinical, but the details were deeply personal. They were twisted pieces of a young girl's private thoughts, repackaged as symptoms. Then the final text message arrived. She wrote this before she ever sat down with me alone. My thumb hovered over the glowing screen of my work phone. The harsh overhead fluorescent lights in my office seemed to buzz slightly. A low electric hum that matched the sudden tension in my neck. The text message glared up at me. She wrote this before she ever sat down with me alone. I did not reply with a comforting emoji. I did not offer empty reassurances. Taking a slow breath, I tapped the screen and dialed the unknown number. The line rang 3 times before a hesitant voice answered. "Are you going to tell my dad about this call?" the voice asked. Sophie sounded smaller than her 15 years, her words tight and guarded. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, shifting into the cold, methodical mindset I used for risk compliance audits. "I am not telling anyone anything yet," I said. "I need to understand exactly what I am looking at." "Where did you find this document, Sophie? Did you take these pictures from Madison's personal laptop or a shared family computer?" There was a heavy pause on the other end. I heard the faint sound of a locker slamming in the background, telling me she was calling from a hallway at her high school. "It was open on the kitchen island," Sophie said, her tone rising with frustration. Her laptop was just sitting there awake. I only looked because I saw my own name on the screen. "Do you even believe me, Amanda? Or are you just going to take her side like everyone else?" I picked up a metal pen from my desk and rolled it between my fingers. The smooth steel felt grounding. "I believe that these images need to be verified," I answered carefully. "I cannot make assumptions based on out-of-context screenshots. You need to save those pictures in a secure folder and speak to your school counselor immediately. This is not something you should handle by yourself." A sharp exhale came through the speaker. "You are talking to me like a police officer," Sophie muttered. "I am talking to you like someone who understands the legal weight of a clinical document," I replied. I needed clean evidence, not a teenage emotional crisis. I knew my sister was manipulative, but faking a clinical evaluation was a felony. I had to be certain. Sophie went quiet for a moment, the ambient noise of teenagers walking past her echoing through the phone. "She is not just moving in," Sophie finally said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "She has been trying to fix me since the engagement." I stopped rolling the pen. Madison had been dating Eli for over a year. They met in May of 2024, a little over 4 years after Eli lost his wife. For the first 10 months, Madison played the role of the fun, understanding girlfriend. She took Sophie shopping. She listened to her complain about teachers. But after the engagement ring appeared in March, the dynamic violently shifted. "What do you mean by fix you?" I asked, pressing the phone closer to my ear. "She holds these family healing sessions in the living room," Sophie explained, her voice trembling slightly. "If I say I do not want to sit in a circle and talk about my trauma, she writes it down in a little notebook. If I close my bedroom door after school, she tells my dad I am displaying isolation behaviors. If I skip breakfast because I am running late, she calls it an eating disordered pattern." My grip on the phone tightened. Madison was weaponizing basic teenage behavior, wrapping ordinary rebellion in heavy psychological terminology. "And my dad believes her," Sophie continued, "because Madison told him that you agreed with her." The air in my office felt suddenly thin. "What did you just say?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously level. "Madison told my dad that she consults with you," Sophie said. "She told him that she shares her notes with you, and that you privately agreed I was showing signs of severe emotional instability. She said you advised her on how to handle me." My stomach dropped, followed instantly by a surge of pure, quiet rage. I had not spoken to Madison about Sophie in months, and I had certainly never offered clinical advice regarding my future niece. Madison was not just using therapy speak to control her household. She was using my professional reputation as a shield to validate her cruelty. "Do not delete anything on your phone," I told Sophie. My tone completely changed. "I will meet you this afternoon." 2 hours later, I pushed open the heavy glass door of a local coffee shop near the high school. The rich smell of roasted espresso beans and warm pastries hit me instantly. I spotted Sophie sitting at a small wooden table in the back corner. 2 tables away sat a woman in a beige cardigan, nursing a tea. Sophie had followed my strict instructions. She had told her school counselor about the meeting, ensuring we were in a public, supervised space. I was not going to give Madison any room to claim I was secretly plotting with a minor behind closed doors. I pulled out a metal chair and sat down across from the teenager. Sophie looked exhausted. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she was gripping a cracked, older model smartphone in both hands like a lifeline. "Show me," I said softly. Sophie pushed the old phone across the scratched wooden table. The screen was spiderwebbed with cracks, but the image was clear enough. It was a photograph of a laptop screen displaying a PDF document. I leaned in, my eyes scanning the top of the digital page. There it was, my full name, my state license number. The document was formatted exactly like the psychosocial summaries I used to write for the county health department. But as I read the paragraphs below the header, a cold realization began to wash over me. The clinical observations were absurd. The language was inflated, taking normal arguments between a father and daughter and twisting them into signs of pathological defiance. But what caught my attention was not the fake diagnosis. It was the visual layout of the page. I stared at the logo in the upper left corner. It was a minimalist graphic of a tree with deep roots. My breath caught in my throat. That was the letterhead from my private practice. I closed my clinical practice 2 years ago to take the corporate compliance job. I had wiped the active servers, shredded the physical intake forms, and transferred all necessary patient records to the state-secure database. That letterhead did not exist on any active medical network. I scrolled down to the bottom of the image. Hovering just above the typed name was an electronic signature. The coffee shop around me faded into a dull roar. The electronic signature was authentic, but it was entirely wrong. It was not the signature I used for clinical notes or patient prescriptions. It was the simplified, low-resolution version I used exclusively for administrative paperwork. I only used that specific file to sign office supply invoices and commercial lease renewals. A memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. 2 years ago, our mother Linda had undergone knee replacement surgery. I was overwhelmed, trying to close down my clinic while managing her medical care. Madison had shown up at my office with empty cardboard boxes and a bright smile. She offered to help me pack. She offered to scan my old administrative files and move the backup hard drives into storage while I took our mother to physical therapy. I had handed my sister the keys to my professional identity. Madison did not have to hack into a secure medical server to steal my credentials. I had packed them into a box and let her carry them out the front door. "Is it fake?" Sophie asked, her quiet voice breaking through my memory. "The document is forged," I said, keeping my eyes on the screen. I did not write a single word of this. Sophie slumped back in her chair, a massive wave of relief washing over her pale face. "I knew it," she whispered. "I told my dad she was making it up, but he said I was just being resistant to help." "Amanda, what is she trying to do? Can she send me away?" I looked up from the phone. Sophie was staring at me with desperate, terrified eyes. She wanted a savior. She wanted me to march over to Eli's house, slam the forged document on the dining table, and rescue her. But I was a compliance officer. I saw the world in legal liabilities, evidence preservation, and proper reporting channels. "Your father has sole legal custody," I explained, my voice steady and measured. "Madison cannot unilaterally enroll you in an inpatient facility or a therapeutic boarding school without his consent and a legitimate, independent medical evaluation. One forged piece of paper is not enough to commit a minor to a residential program. You need to stay calm and let the system work." Sophie blinked, the relief draining completely out of her expression. "Let the system work," she repeated, her voice turning bitter. "My dad is marrying her in less than 3 months. He agrees with everything she says. By the time your system works, I will be locked in a behavioral camp in another state." I sighed, leaning forward to try and inject some reason into the conversation. "Sophie, we cannot confront them with a photograph of a laptop screen. We need server logs. We need metadata. If we accuse her right now, she will delete the original files, claim you photoshopped the image to ruin her wedding, and your father will believe her. We have to follow the process." Sophie stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. The school counselor 2 tables away looked up in concern. "You are just like him," Sophie said, her voice shaking with unshed tears. "You care more about your rules and your license than you care about what is happening to me in that house. I do not need a lawyer, Amanda. I needed someone to tell my dad to wake up." Before I could reach out, Sophie snatched her cracked phone off the table, turned her back, and walked out the front door of the coffee shop. The counselor gave me a tight, disapproving look before gathering her coat and following the teenager out onto the sidewalk. I sat alone at the table, staring at my empty hands. The smell of roasted coffee suddenly made me nauseous. I had given her factually correct legal instructions, but I had offered her absolutely the wrong kind of help. I treated a terrified child like a hostile witness, and I had pushed her away right when she needed an adult to stand between her and my sister. I stood up, threw a $5 bill on the table for a coffee I never ordered, and walked out to my car. The steering wheel felt hot under my hands as I drove back to my office. My mind was racing, trying to piece together the scope of Madison's lie. If she was bold enough to forge a clinical document to manipulate her future stepdaughter, what else was she doing with my name? When I reached my office, I locked the door behind me. I pulled my personal laptop from my leather bag and placed it on the desk. It took me 3 tries to remember the master password for my old private practice email archive. I had set it up to forward important tax documents to my current address, but I rarely checked the original inbox anymore. The loading icon spun on the screen for what felt like an eternity. When the inbox finally rendered, I bypassed the main folder and clicked directly into the spam and promotional filters. I typed Madison into the search bar. Nothing. I typed the word platform. 2 automated newsletters from an old billing software company appeared. I took a breath and typed my own license number. The screen blinked, and a single email populated in the search results. It was dated 5 months ago, long before Madison had even drafted the fake report about Sophie. The sender was a corporate domain for a high-tier digital wellness platform, a company that hosted expensive life coaching courses and alternative therapy seminars. I clicked on the subject line. It read, "Verification complete for the repaired family." My eyes scanned the body of the email. It was a standard automated confirmation message, the kind triggered when a new vendor account finishes the credentialing phase. But the words on the screen made the blood roar in my ears. The text read, "Thank you for confirming Amanda Pierce as the licensed clinical consultant attached to this program. The repaired family with Madison Pierce is now approved for premium client enrollment. Your clinical oversight badge has been activated on the public course directory." I stared at the glowing pixels until they blurred. Madison was not just using my identity to win an argument in her living room. She had not just stolen my letterhead to gaslight a teenager. She had used my state license to bypass the legal requirements of a corporate wellness platform. She had built an entire commercial brand, selling expensive coaching packages to vulnerable strangers, all under the false promise that a licensed medical professional was supervising her work. I reached out and placed my hand flat against the cool aluminum beside the trackpad. I had spent my entire life being the responsible older sister. I had bitten my tongue when Madison threw tantrums, stepped aside when she demanded the spotlight, and endured my mother constantly telling me that Madison just needed a little more grace because she was sensitive. But this was not a childhood rivalry over a stolen sweater. This was identity theft. This was medical fraud. Madison had taken the professional name I spent 10 years earning, and she was using it to manipulate a grieving father, silence a teenage girl, and defraud paying clients. She thought I was still the quiet, forgiving sister who would just clean up her mess to keep the family peace. She had no idea who she was dealing with anymore. I minimized the email window, opened a blank document, and began typing a formal legal preservation notice. The wedding was just under 11 weeks away, but the investigation into Madison Pierce was going to start that day. The morning sun felt unnaturally bright as it cut through the horizontal blinds of my home office. It was early September, exactly 10 weeks before the wedding. My coffee had gone completely cold in its ceramic mug, leaving a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth. I sat staring at the glowing monitor, my fingers resting heavily on the keyboard. Discovering the verification email from the wellness platform had shifted the ground beneath my feet. This was no longer just a toxic family dynamic. This was a verifiable crime. My first call went to the chief technology officer at my former clinical network. The phone rang for what felt like an eternity before a tired voice answered. I explained the situation using strictly professional terminology, keeping my voice devoid of any sisterly panic. I needed to know if the main hospital servers had been breached. "We ran a full diagnostic on your inactive credentials," the technology officer explained. the sound of a mechanical keyboard clacking loudly over the speaker. Nobody has accessed the primary patient database using your login since you closed the practice 2 years ago. The mainframe is completely secure. A sharp breath escaped my lungs. The relief was immediate, but it was quickly replaced by a colder, harder reality. Madison had not hacked a protected medical system. She had simply opened the cardboard boxes of offline backups our mother had handed her. She had taken the digital letterhead, the administrative electronic signature, and the blank template files I used for intake summaries. The damage was entirely localized to the files she physically possessed. Lock every legacy account associated with my name, I instructed him. Freeze the credential verification portals. If anyone attempts to authenticate a document using my license number, I want a flagged report sent directly to my current employer. The technician agreed and ended the call. I closed my laptop, slid it into my leather work bag, and drove straight to downtown Lake Haven. The law offices of Naomi Chen smelled of expensive lemon polish and fresh paper. Naomi sat behind a massive glass desk, her dark hair pulled back into a severe knot. She was a lawyer specializing in professional identity theft and corporate compliance. She did not deal in family therapy, and she did not care about hurt feelings. Naomi reviewed the printed screenshot of Sophie's forged assessment and the platform verification email. Her pen tapped a steady, rhythmic beat against the glass surface. "You cannot confront her like a sister," Naomi said, her dark eyes locking onto mine. "You have to treat her like a hostile corporate entity. You are not allowed to access her personal laptop. You are not allowed to distribute the teenage girl's private journal entries to anyone else. And you will not have any unsupervised arguments with the bride until we lock down the digital trail." I swallowed hard, the dry air of the office scratching at my throat. "What is our first move?" I asked. Naomi opened a thick manila folder and pulled out a blank legal document. "We send a formal preservation notice to the wellness platform," she stated. "We demand that they freeze the account named the Repaired Family. We force them to lock down all advertising materials, payment records, and server access logs. If your sister tries to delete her history to save her wedding, the platform will have a mirrored copy of every keystroke she ever made." My chest tightened at the finality of the legal strategy. Once that notice went out, the system would take over. Madison would no longer be able to cry her way out of the consequences. "Send it," I said. Naomi nodded, her pen gliding across the paper. She looked up briefly. "Do not warn her, Amanda. Let the certified letter do the talking." But I knew my sister. A certified letter would only give Madison time to spin a narrative, to paint herself as a victim of a faceless corporation. I needed to look her in the eye and watch her explain how she justified stealing my professional identity. The next morning, I drove to the commercial district on the edge of town. Madison rented a boutique coaching studio sandwiched between an expensive yoga facility and an organic juice bar. The front window was painted with sweeping gold cursive letters that read, "Heal Your Roots." I pushed the glass door open. A tiny brass bell chimed overhead. The air inside was thick with the scent of burning sage and lavender essential oil. Woven rugs covered the hardwood floor, and soft acoustic guitar music played from hidden speakers. It was a perfectly constructed sanctuary of artificial peace. Madison stood behind a reclaimed wood reception desk, unboxing a shipment of branded scented candles. She wore a flowing linen jumpsuit, her blonde hair falling in loose, effortless waves around her shoulders. She looked up, surprise flashing across her features before settling into a practiced, radiant smile. "Amanda," Madison said, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. "You never come to the studio. Are you here to finally let me do a wellness mapping session for you?" I did not smile. I walked across the woven rugs, the sharp click of my heels breaking the serene acoustic atmosphere. I stopped, right at the edge of her wooden desk. I unzipped my leather bag, pulled out the folded screenshot of the psychosocial summary bearing my name, and placed it flat on the counter next to a row of lavender candles. "Explain this," I said quietly. Madison looked down. Her manicured fingers paused on the rim of a glass jar. She did not gasp. She did not frantically deny it. The practiced warmth simply drained from her face, leaving behind a cold, calculating mask I rarely saw in public. "Where did you get that?" Madison asked, her voice dropping an octave. It does not matter how I got it, I replied, keeping my hands perfectly still at my sides. What matters is that my clinical license number is sitting at the top of a document diagnosing a teenager you have absolutely no legal or medical authority to evaluate. You stole my letterhead. Madison let out a soft, dismissive sigh. She picked up the paper, glanced at it like it was a minor typo on a restaurant menu, and tossed it back onto the desk. I did not steal anything, Amanda. I borrowed a template, Madison said, leaning against the wooden counter. You walked away from clinical practice 2 years ago. You sit in a cubicle doing compliance paperwork all day. That license is just gathering dust on your wall. I actually use my empathy to help people. My clients know I am a coach, not a doctor. Nobody is getting hurt. My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. You are charging people money for a premium course that required a verified clinical consultant, I countered, my voice rising just slightly over the acoustic guitar music. You forged an email to a corporate platform claiming I was overseeing your work. And you are using my name to convince a grieving father that his teenage daughter needs a residential boarding facility. Madison crossed her arms, the loose linen sleeves bunching at her elbows. She tilted her head, looking at me with a mixture of pity and deep, genuine resentment. You always do this, Madison whispered, her tone suddenly turning venomous. You always have to be the smartest person in the room. You always have to remind everyone that you have the framed degrees and the fancy titles. She stepped around the reception desk, closing the distance between us. The heavy scent of sage was becoming suffocating. Do you remember our mother's birthday dinner 2 years ago? Madison asked, her eyes narrowing. I had just finished my weekend certification for wellness coaching. I was so proud. I told the whole table about my new business plan. And do you remember what you said to me, right in front of Eli? My stomach dropped. I remembered the dinner perfectly. I remembered the exhaustion of closing my clinic, the stress of managing our mother's physical therapy, and the sheer irritation of listening to Madison equating a weekend online seminar to my decade of grueling medical training. Madison took another step forward, her voice trembling with rehearsed indignation. You looked at me, over your glass of wine, and you told the whole family. Understanding people is not the same as being qualified to treat them. You humiliated me. You made Eli look at me like I was a child playing dress-up. The silence in the studio felt heavier than the scented air. She was right about the dinner. I had spoken those exact words. That statement was factually correct, I said, keeping my voice dangerously steady. But I admit I said it to shame you. I was tired and I was cruel, and I was wrong to embarrass you in front of the man you were dating. I apologize for how I handled that dinner. Madison smiled, a small, victorious smirk pulling at the corner of her mouth. She thought my apology was a surrender. She thought she had found the emotional leverage she needed to make me back down. But I am not apologizing for my license, I continued, my tone dropping all remaining warmth. Being hurt by my words did not give you the right to steal my professional identity. You crossed a line from sibling rivalry into criminal fraud. The smirk vanished from Madison's face. Her eyes hardened into dark, defensive slits. She walked back behind the wooden desk and picked up the printed screenshot. Let us make a deal, Madison said smoothly, tapping the paper against her palm. You let the wedding happen, without causing a scene. You sign a simple, informal letter stating that you briefly reviewed my wellness curriculum in the past. Just something vague to satisfy the platform auditors. If you do that, I will immediately take your name off the website after the honeymoon. I stared at her, genuinely horrified by the casual nature of her extortion. And what about Sophie? I asked. Madison waved her hand dismissively. I will drop the assessment. I will tell Eli she is making great progress and does not need the boarding school. Everyone wins. You keep your pristine reputation, I keep my business, and your new niece gets to stay in her comfortable bedroom. A cold chill ran down my spine. Madison did not see a vulnerable 15-year-old girl. She saw a bargaining chip. She was perfectly willing to trade Sophie's psychological safety for a forged signature. I reached across the desk, my hand moving faster than Madison could react. I snatched the printed screenshot out of her fingers, folded it neatly, and slipped it back into my leather bag. "I am not signing anything," I said, staring directly into her eyes. "And I am not negotiating the terms of a felony." Madison stood completely still. The acoustic music seemed to swell in the silent room. "You are really going to do this?" she asked, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You are going to ruin my wedding over a piece of paper." "You ruined your own wedding the moment you typed my name," I replied. I turned around and walked toward the glass door. As my hand touched the brass handle, Madison called out from the reception desk. "Eli will never believe you," she said, her voice ringing with absolute certainty. "He wants this family to work more than he wants the truth." I pushed the door open and stepped out into the bright, humid morning air. The brass bell chimed cheerfully behind me. The drive back to my office was a blur of traffic lights and engine noise. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. Madison was not just going to wait for the legal notice to arrive. She was going to strike first. I knew her well enough to recognize the panic hiding beneath her confident threats. I had barely parked my car in the corporate lot when my phone vibrated in the cup holder. The caller identification displayed my mother's name. I answered the call, pressing the phone to my ear. "Amanda, what is wrong with you?" Linda cried out, her voice loud and frantic. "Why are you attacking your sister at her place of business?" I closed my eyes and let my head fall back against the headrest. "What exactly did Madison tell you?" I asked wearily. "She is sobbing," Linda said, the sound of movement echoing in the background, as if she were pacing her living room. "She said you came into her studio threatening to destroy her brand just because she is finally successful. She said you are trying to cancel her wedding because you are jealous of her and Eli." "Amanda," she sent Eli an audio recording of you screaming at her. My eyes snapped open. "A recording? What did the recording say?" I demanded, sitting up straight in the driver's seat. Linda sniffled loudly. "It was awful, Amanda. You told her she was playing dress-up. You told her understanding people does not mean she is qualified to treat them. Eli is furious. He said he does not want that kind of toxic energy near his daughter." I gripped the phone tightly. Madison had recorded our conversation, but she had edited out the entire discussion about the forged document and the stolen license. She had only kept the part where we discussed the dinner from 2 years ago, specifically cutting the audio to make my apology sound like a random, unprovoked attack on her qualifications. She had weaponized my own guilt against me. "Mom, listen to me carefully," I said, forcing my voice to remain calm. "Madison stole my clinical license number. She is using my name to forge medical documents." There was a long, agonizing pause on the other end of the line. The sound of passing cars outside my windshield seemed overwhelmingly loud. "You always do this," Linda finally whispered, her voice thick with disappointment. "You always have to tear her down when she is happy. I will not let you ruin this wedding, Amanda." The line went dead. I lowered the phone from my ear. I immediately opened my contact list and pressed the button to call Eli. The automated carrier voice responded before the first ring even finished. "The number you have reached is not accepting calls at this time." Eli had blocked me. Madison had successfully isolated the narrative. She had built a fortress around her fiancé and our mother, using my past arrogance as the mortar. She had painted herself as the victim of a jealous, bitter older sister, and they had bought the ticket without asking to see the show. I sat in the hot car for a long time, listening to the engine cooling down. Madison thought she had won. She thought the digital manipulation of a single audio file would be enough to bury the truth under a mountain of family drama. Then my phone vibrated again. It was a text message from Naomi Chen. I tapped the screen to open the message, the bright letters burning into my vision. I read the short sentence 3 times to make sure I was not hallucinating. "The wellness platform responded to the preservation notice," Naomi wrote. "They locked the account, but they also ran a system check on your clinical license number." I held my breath, waiting for the second message bubble to appear. The bubble popped up a second later. "Madison did not just use your name for Sophie. The platform found your forged signature attached to 7 additional client profiles." The silence inside my car felt absolute. This was no longer a family dispute over a teenage girl. Madison had built an entire empire of lies, and the foundation was about to collapse. Mid-September brought a bitter, unseasonable chill to the city. Naomi spread a thick stack of printed server logs across the glass surface of her conference table. The wellness platform had finally complied with our preservation notice, delivering a mountain of digital footprints. The air in the legal office smelled faintly of ozone and expensive espresso. Naomi did not speak right away. Her manicured fingers simply tapped against a specific line of black ink. Leaning closer, the data came into sharp focus. The document bearing my forged signature carried a creation timestamp. The digital file had been opened, named, and populated with clinical headers exactly 4 days before the private afternoon session Madison arranged with Sophie. My sister had not conducted an evaluation and subsequently typed her notes. She had authored the conclusion first, waiting for a convenient moment to justify her predetermined lies. We spent the next 2 hours reviewing the preserved cloud backups produced by the platform's legal team. Reading the early drafts made a cold nausea settle in my stomach. The text took mundane complaints Eli had shared with Madison and weaponized them into severe pathology. A simple argument about skipping breakfast morphed into a marked pattern of food restriction. Slamming a bedroom door became aggressive isolation tactics. One specific sentence practically vibrated off the page. The highlighted text read, "Persistent escape ideation and fixation on family collapse." Recognizing the underlying sentiment was easy, but the clinical packaging was pure manipulation. Eli had walked into his kitchen after a minor disagreement and found a notebook resting open on the granite counter. The exposed page contained a single, angry thought written in blue ink. "Sometimes I want to leave this house and never come back." Panic had clouded his judgment. Instead of sitting down with his child, Eli took a photograph of the page and sent it to his fiancée. Madison promised to show the image to me for a professional risk assessment. Instead, she fed those vulnerable words directly into a fake psychological profile. The realization forced a brutal mirror in front of my own face. My initial reaction to Sophie had been completely wrong. Meeting the teenager required absolute transparency. We arranged to sit in a small, brightly lit room inside the high school administration building. The guidance counselor sat quietly in a plastic chair near the door, ensuring the environment remained secure. The sterile scent of industrial floor wax hung heavy in the room. Sophie looked incredibly small. Dark circles bruised the fragile skin under her eyes, and her shoulders hunched defensively. Her hands gripped the cracked smartphone like a physical shield. Looking at her exhaustion, a wave of profound guilt washed over my chest. I looked directly into her brown eyes and spoke without any corporate deflection. "I gave you correct instructions and the wrong kind of help," I said softly. My voice carried no excuses. "You came to me terrified, and I treated you like a liability instead of family. I am deeply sorry." Sophie stared back, her guard remaining firmly in place. Her fingers traced the sharp cracks across her screen. "We can use the digital timeline," Sophie finally whispered, her voice barely carrying over the hum of the overhead lights. "But you cannot read my diary to a courtroom. You cannot show those pages to anyone else." I nodded slowly, making an absolute promise. "Your privacy remains yours. We will prove the forgery using the metadata and the server logs." Securing her trust was only the first step. Getting Eli to listen required an ambush. He had blocked my cell phone number and completely ignored my emails. When he walked out of the glass lobby of his architectural firm on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, I stepped directly onto the wet pavement in front of him. City traffic roared loudly around us, splashing muddy water against the curb. His face hardened instantly upon seeing me. "Amanda, I am not doing this," Eli stated loudly, holding up a damp hand. "Madison already told me about your studio visit. You need to back off and leave us alone." Arguing would only make him defensive. Reaching into my wool coat pocket, I pulled out a thick, notarized declaration and pressed the stiff paper against his chest. "Read it," I insisted. Stepping back into the freezing rain, Eli glanced down at the legal seal. The document clearly stated under penalty of perjury that I had never interviewed, evaluated, or supervised any private session regarding his daughter. Confusion rippled across his tired features. The paper felt heavy in his hands. Madison said you offered informal guidance, Eli muttered, his confidence faltering as the rain spotted the black ink. She said you gave her those forms to help us figure out what was wrong with Sophie. The rain started falling harder, soaking my shoulders. I never gave her any forms, I replied, keeping my tone perfectly level. I missed an automated email months ago, and I initially doubted Sophie because I assumed she was just acting out over the wedding. I made terrible mistakes, Eli. But Madison committed fraud. She wrote that evaluation 4 days before she even sat down alone with your daughter. Eli stared at the notarized paper. He wanted to believe the truth standing right in front of him, but doing so required accepting a devastating reality. Believing me meant admitting he was marrying a manipulator. It meant admitting he had failed to protect his own child from emotional abuse. He folded the wet paper, shoved it deeply into his coat pocket, and walked toward his car without speaking another word. 3 days later, the stakes escalated from a psychological threat to an imminent physical removal. Sophie sent a frantic text message containing a photograph of a bank statement. She had found the paper sitting openly on the home office desk. The document displayed a massive outgoing wire transfer. Eli and Madison had placed a non-refundable deposit for a therapeutic boarding school located 3 states away. The formal enrollment date was set for exactly 2 weeks after the wedding. A cold dread settled deep inside my chest. The facility required an independent clinical assessment before confirming admission, which meant Madison could not ship the teenager away immediately. But the countdown had officially started. The wedding was no longer just a ceremony. It was a deadline for Sophie losing her home. Later that same evening, the screen of my phone lit up with another image. This time, it was a screenshot of a direct text message from Madison to her future stepdaughter. The words were venomous and brilliantly clear. Keep pushing, and your father will choose the home that can survive without you. Sophie had captured the screen mere seconds before Madison deleted the message from the chat history. The calculated cruelty was staggering. My sister was not just trying to help a troubled child, she was actively trying to break her. Calling Sophie immediately, my heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Did you show this threat to Eli?" I asked, my voice tight with suppressed anger. A quiet, shaky breath came through the small speaker. "He will not care," Sophie replied, her voice breaking into a quiet sob. "He thinks everything she says comes from a place of healing. But Amanda, there is something else." "What is it?" I pressed, gripping the phone tight enough to turn my knuckles white. "She did not get those words from Dad," Sophie whispered into the receiver. "She got them from my journal." Late September brought a bitter, unseasonable wind that stripped the dying leaves from the oak trees outside my kitchen window. Holding a warm ceramic mug of green tea, my attention drifted to the vibrating smartphone resting on the cold marble counter. The screen illuminated, displaying a fresh notification from a popular social media application. Tapping the glass surface, a video immediately began to play, filling the quiet kitchen with the sound of a familiar, trembling voice. Madison filled the frame. Wearing a soft gray oversized sweater, her blonde hair was styled to look messy in a carefully constructed, effortless way. Her eyes appeared red and heavily swollen. The background showed the interior of her boutique coaching studio, softly lit by flickering expensive lavender candles. Sometimes, the people who should support your healing journey are the very ones trying to destroy it, Madison whispered directly into the microphone. A single, perfect tear escaped her left eye, rolling slowly down her cheek. "A relative of mine is currently using their professional credentials to control my family. They are threatening to ruin my upcoming wedding out of pure, malicious jealousy. Please send healing light to my fiancé and me during this incredibly dark season." No specific names were spoken, but the deliberate implications struck like a physical blow to my chest. Scrolling down, the comment section had already exploded with hundreds of sympathetic messages from her loyal followers. My stomach twisted into a painful, tight knot. Seconds later, the phone vibrated again in my palm. A text message from our mother illuminated the screen. Linda had shared the crying video to her own personal profile. "Stop this war right now," Linda wrote, the digital words glaring up at me. "You are breaking your sister apart." setting the ceramic mug down hard enough to rattle the marble counter. A cold, sharp clarity washed over my mind. Madison was expertly weaponizing public sympathy. She was racing to paint me as an unstable, bitter older sister before the official licensing board could finish their quiet investigation. She wanted to control the narrative entirely, building an emotional fortress before the factual evidence could ever reach the surface. Morning traffic dragged endlessly on the drive to the corporate office the following day. Arriving at my desk, the fluorescent lights overhead hummed a dull, headache-inducing rhythm. Sitting down in the ergonomic chair, a shadow fell across my keyboard. David, a senior analyst from the risk management department, stood hovering near the edge of my cubicle, holding a digital tablet loosely in his left hand. He shifted his weight nervously from side to side. "Are you doing okay today, Amanda?" David asked, his voice low and incredibly cautious. "My wife follows a lot of wellness influencers online. She showed me a video this morning over breakfast. People in the comments section are actively matching the timeline of the allegations to the exact year your clinical practice closed." Hearing those specific words spoken aloud in my professional environment made my pulse hammer violently against my ribs. Madison had successfully dragged my corporate reputation into her chaotic web of lies. Nodding slowly at my coworker, a firm decision formed in my mind. Defending myself in a public comment section would only feed her desperate victim narrative. Corporate survival required utilizing proper, documented channels. Standing up, my office chair rolled backward, scraping against the thin carpet. Walking directly down the hallway toward the compliance director, a thick glass door separated me from my boss. Knocking twice, permission to enter followed immediately. Sitting across the polished mahogany desk, every single detail of the conflict poured out of my mouth. Transparency remained my only viable shield against the allegations. Submitting a formal conflict of interest disclosure, my request to recuse myself from any corporate account reviews involving the wellness platform was officially logged into the Human Resources database. Leaving the director after the meeting, a profound sense of relief mixed with a simmering, heavy anger. Proving my professional integrity meant willingly giving up control. It meant proving my actions were guided by ethical standards, not born from petty sibling revenge. Rain lashed violently against the tall, floor-to-ceiling windows of Naomi Chen exactly 2 days later. The lawyer sat quietly in her downtown office, sliding a thick, glossy presentation folder across the black glass table. The heavy cardstock smelled distinctly of expensive commercial printer ink and fresh paper. The wellness platform legal team sent this over yesterday during the initial document discovery phase, Naomi stated, pointing a perfectly polished fingernail at the cover page. Picking up the heavy packet, the title read in bold gold letters, "The Repaired Family Course Expansion." Flipping past the initial pages of meaningless marketing buzzwords and stock photos of smiling, cohesive families, a specific organizational chart caught my eye. My breath hitched abruptly in my throat. Printed boldly under the heading of Licensed Clinical Oversight Director was my full legal name, followed immediately by my active state license number. "Your sister is currently negotiating a massive partnership contract with a national retreat center," Naomi explained, leaning back in her leather executive chair. "Signing that lucrative deal requires a verified medical professional on staff to satisfy their corporate insurance underwriters. The contract finalization date is set for exactly 3 days after her wedding ceremony." Staring blankly at the glossy paper, the true depth of the motivation finally snapped into terrifying focus. This was never just about proving she could handle a difficult teenager like Sophie. This was a highly calculated financial scheme. Madison desperately needed my credentials to secure a massive corporate partnership, elevating her fake wellness brand into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. She had stolen my identity for pure profit. Returning home later that evening, a familiar silver sedan sat parked unevenly in my driveway. Linda stood on the covered wooden porch, clutching a damp umbrella. Smelling heavily of synthetic vanilla perfume and nervous sweat, our mother stepped inside the hallway without waiting for an invitation. "You have to drop the lawyers, Amanda," Linda pleaded, her voice echoing loudly off the hardwood floors. "Madison is absolutely terrified. She says you are trying to bankrupt her business just because she borrowed some old templates for a client exercise." Hanging my wet wool coat on the brass rack, a sharp burst of intense frustration erupted from my chest, She forged medical documents. Mom, I replied, keeping my voice as level as possible. She is actively using my medical license to sell expensive courses to vulnerable people. Where did she even get my official letterhead? Linda completely avoided making eye contact. She stared intensely at the woven rug under her wet shoes. Her heavy silence stretched into a painful, agonizing confession. 2 years ago, Linda whispered, her voice trembling slightly. When you closed the clinic and took care of me after my knee replacement surgery, you left 3 cardboard boxes of clinic supplies sitting in my garage. Madison came over one afternoon to help clean the house. The blood rushed violently in my ears, creating a loud rushing sound. What exactly did you give her? I demanded. Tears spilled freely down our mother, tracing lines through her makeup. She said she just wanted to learn how to organize a proper filing system for her coaching business, Linda sobbed. I gave her the box containing the blank folders, the brass nameplate, and the silver backup drive. I truly thought I was helping her learn from your success. A crushing, suffocating weight settled firmly on my shoulders. Madison had not executed a brilliant digital heist. Our own mother had willingly handed over the digital keys to my entire career, completely blinded by a desperate desire to see her youngest daughter succeed. A bitter, metallic taste flooded my mouth. Owning my own mistakes was absolutely unavoidable now. Failing to secure that specific backup drive during a chaotic time in my life provided the exact weapon Madison was currently firing at Sophie. Sitting in the law office the following morning, Naomi stared at me with an uncomfortable, piercing intensity. Rain continued to hammer the glass exterior of the building, matching the dark mood inside the room. We have the metadata, the pitch deck, and the platform logs, Naomi said, tapping her silver pen against the desk in a steady rhythm. But before we forward this mountain of evidence to the state prosecutor, you need to answer a very difficult question. What do you actually want out of this process, Amanda? Looking away, my gaze traced the gray city skyline outside the window. I want to protect Sophie from being sent away to a residential facility. That is only one piece of the puzzle, Naomi countered, her voice sharp and completely unyielding. Do you want to fix your professional record? Or do you want to publicly humiliate your sister and prove to your entire family that you were right all along? Because if you turn this situation into a public execution at the wedding reception, Madison will drag that teenage girl down with her just to survive. Closing my eyes, a painful, ugly truth surfaced from the depths of my mind. Wanting to protect a child was a noble, righteous goal. But a dark, festering part of my soul desperately wanted pure validation. Years of watching Madison receive endless grace and financial bailouts while I carried the heavy burden of responsibility had left a deep, angry scar. Admitting that selfish desire out loud felt like swallowing crushed glass. I want all 3 things, I confessed softly, opening my eyes to meet the lawyer directly. But Sophie comes first. Whatever we do, the teenager does not become collateral damage. Naomi nodded slowly, seemingly satisfied with the brutal honesty. She opened her laptop and began drafting the next phase of the legal strategy. Returning to my corporate office that afternoon, a strange notification chimed loudly on my computer speakers. An email from a completely unknown sender had bypassed my strict spam filter. The subject line read, "Urgent inquiry regarding treatment summary." Clicking the message open, a woman named Rachel introduced herself in the first paragraph. Her written words were desperate, frantic, and dripping with raw fear. Rachel explained that she had paid a massive premium fee to Madison for private coaching services, explicitly because my clinical oversight badge promised a high level of professional medical privacy. Madison just sent a psychological treatment summary to my husband and his divorce lawyer, Rachel wrote. The words blurring slightly as my eyes raced across the screen. She claimed you personally signed off on my severe emotional instability. My husband is using this document in court tomorrow morning. I am going to lose primary custody of my 2 children because of your evaluation. A freezing chill raced rapidly down my spine, settling deep into my bones. Sophie was not the first victim. Sophie was just the most convenient target in a long line of profitable deception. Attached to the bottom of the email was a scanned PDF document. Opening the file with a trembling hand, My forged signature sat at the very bottom of the white page, entirely identical to the one used against Eli and his daughter. The logo of the Deep Roots tree sat proudly in the upper left corner. Zooming in on the text to read the specific clinical claims, my breath stopped completely in my throat. Located directly beneath my stolen name, printed in bold black ink, was a glaring typographical error. It was a highly specific word that Madison consistently misspelled in her personal text messages and birthday cards over the last 10 years. The official header of the document read, "Clinical Assessment." Missing a single letter in the middle of the word, that tiny, careless mistake linked every single forged document together like an invisible thread. Madison never bothered to run a spell check on her stolen templates. My professional name was currently floating through messy divorce courts, custody battles, and private family disputes across the entire state, leaving a trail of shattered lives in its wake. The pale morning light filtered through the tall, vertical blinds of my corporate office, casting long, gray shadows across the heavy oak desk. It was early November, exactly 2 weeks before the wedding ceremony that was scheduled to take place in downtown Lake Haven. My coffee mug sat untouched, the dark liquid turning cold and flat while I stared down at the blinking cursor on my computer screen. My phone vibrated sharply against the polished wood, breaking the heavy silence. Naomi Chen's name flashed across the bright digital display. I swiped the screen to accept the call, my breathing shallow and tightly controlled. "The licensing board just updated our inquiry status," Naomi stated without any introductory pleasantries. "They have formally opened a comprehensive investigation. They are looking at the digital metadata, the server logs, and the platform verification files. But Amanda, you need to understand something very important. They are also reviewing the administrative procedures you used when you closed down your physical clinic 2 years ago." A cold wave of anxiety washed over my chest. I swallowed hard, the dry air scratching at my throat. "Are they questioning my professional standing?" I asked, keeping my voice carefully measured. "They are doing their due diligence," Naomi replied calmly. "Because you left legacy backups in a residential garage without strict cryptographic erasure protocols, the board has to verify that you did not actively participate in or negligently facilitate this breach. You are not a target of the criminal fraud charges, but your record closure practices are officially under administrative review. You will likely receive a formal administrative reprimand regarding proper document disposal." The reality hit me with quiet force. I was not completely untouchable in this process. My own past oversight in packing those cardboard boxes had left a tiny crack in my armor, and the regulatory board intended to inspect every inch of it. I had been so consumed by righteous anger that I momentarily forgot my own hands were not entirely clean. "I accept whatever administrative review the board requires," I said firmly. "The important thing is that the platform preservation orders are locked in place." "They are locked tighter than a bank vault," Naomi assured me. "Your sister cannot delete a single digital footprint now. Every single forged document, every payment record, and every automated email confirmation is permanently mirrored on our legal servers. She can reset her laptop and throw her phone into the lake, but the cloud trail will follow her straight into a courtroom." We ended the call, leaving me alone with the quiet hum of the office ventilation system. 2 weeks remained until the wedding. Madison thought she was sprinting toward a multi-million-dollar corporate partnership and a fairy tale ceremony, completely unaware that the legal noose was already pulled taut around her professional life. That evening, I drove out to the suburban neighborhood where Sophie and her father lived. The air smelled of damp earth and decaying autumn leaves. I had arranged to meet the teenager at a small neighborhood park located 3 blocks away from her house. The playground equipment stood completely deserted under the dim, flickering amber glow of a single street lamp. Sophie sat on a wooden park bench, her arms wrapped tightly around her chest against the biting evening chill. Her cracked smartphone rested on the wooden slats beside her. When my footsteps crunched loudly against the gravel path, she looked up quickly, her brown eyes wide and apprehensive. "Did my dad find out about the bank statement?" Sophie asked immediately, her voice trembling slightly in the cold air. "No, he has not seen us talking," I answered, taking a seat beside her on the bench. "Your father is still entirely focused on the wedding preparations. But we need to finalize the contents of the box." Sophie frowned, pulling her jacket tighter around her narrow shoulders. "What box?" she whispered. "The box I am bringing to the wedding reception," I explained, keeping my tone gentle and reassuring. Naomi and I prepared a physical container to leave at the gift table. "It serves as our final, formal warning to your father and my sister before state authorities took over the case in the coming months." The teenager turned her head sharply, staring at me with deep suspicion. "Are you going to print my diary pages and hand them to the wedding guests?" she demanded, her voice rising with sudden panic. "Are you going to humiliate me in front of everyone just to get back at her?" I held up both hands in a defensive gesture, shaking my head slowly. "Listen to me, Sophie. Your privacy is absolute." I gave Naomi strict instructions, and we removed every single reference to your personal journal entries from the physical file. Your name will not be projected on a screen, and your private thoughts will remain entirely confidential. "What is actually going inside the box, then?" Sophie asked, her shoulders dropping just a fraction of an inch. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out a printed inventory list, holding it out under the amber light of the street lamp. "First, we are including the physical brass nameplate from my old clinical practice," I said, pointing to the first line of text. "It represents the professional identity Madison spent months exploiting. Second, we are including a forensically clean backup of your old phone containing the direct text message threats she deleted from your chat history, completely stripped of any unrelated personal data. Third, we are including a certified declaration under penalty of perjury, proving that I never evaluated, interviewed, or treated you in any professional capacity. Fourth, we are including the heavily redacted server access timeline, showing precisely when my credentials were attached to unauthorized client files without my consent." Sophie scanned the list line by line, her breathing gradually slowing down to a normal rhythm. She reached out and touched the corner of the paper. "And what about my dad?" she whispered. "Does he get anything special?" I pulled a crisp, plain white envelope from my bag and laid it gently on top of the inventory sheet. "Inside is a private letter addressed directly to Eli," I told her. "It contains a single instruction. It asks him to look at the metadata timestamps and question my sister about why those clinical reports existed 4 days before she ever sat down to speak with you alone. It gives him one final, honest chance to step away from the fraud before the criminal indictments drop." Sophie stared at the white envelope for a long time. The wind rustled the bare branches of the oak trees overhead, sending a cascade of dry leaves clattering across the asphalt. She did not smile, but the hard, defensive tension finally drained from her posture. "Okay," Sophie murmured, picking up her cracked phone and sliding it into her pocket. "As long as nobody reads my diary out loud, I agree to the box." We walked back toward her neighborhood together in silence, parting ways at the corner before her house came into view. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying precision. The legal framework was solid, the forensic evidence was secure, and the primary witness was protected. 2 days later, the front doorbell of my house rang sharply. Opening the heavy wooden door, I found our mother standing on the porch. Linda looked exhausted, her hair slightly disheveled, and her winter coat buttoned unevenly. She pushed past me into the warm entryway without waiting for an invitation, the scent of heavy floral perfume filling the hallway. "You have to stop this madness," Linda announced, her voice shaking with genuine distress as she turned to face me in the living room. "Madison is crying herself to sleep every single night. She says you are trying to destroy her life simply because you are bitter that you gave up your career while she built a successful brand." I crossed my arms over my chest, leaning against the living room wall. "I am not trying to destroy her life, Mom," I replied, keeping my tone carefully neutral. "Madison committed identity theft and professional fraud. She used my license number to sell services to vulnerable strangers and manipulated a grieving father using forged medical documents." Linda waved her hands frantically in the air, dismissing the legal gravity of the situation with a bitter scoff. "She is your sister, Amanda. Families forgive each other. Madison promised me that the moment she returns from her honeymoon in the Bahamas, she will permanently remove your name from her website and never touch your old templates again. Why can you not just wait until after the wedding to resolve your professional grievances?" A heavy, suffocating weight settled in my stomach. Because waiting until after the honeymoon means letting her finalize a multi-million-dollar corporate partnership built entirely on a stolen identity, I answered sharply. It means letting her continue to defraud innocent clients who trust a medical credential that does not belong to her. Linda stared at me, her eyes filling with bitter tears of disappointment. "You have always been so cold," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "You care more about your rules, your compliance manuals, and your legal documents than you care about keeping this family together. Madison is fragile. She needs our protection." "She does not need protection, Mom," I said softly, stepping closer to the woman who raised us. "She needs accountability. And every single time you rushed in to shield her from the consequences of her own destructive choices, you only taught her that bad behavior belongs to someone else to fix." Linda shook her head violently, refusing to accept the brutal reality of her own enabling behavior. She turned around, marched out the front door, and slammed it shut with enough force to rattle the framed pictures hanging in the hallway. I watched her drive away through the living room window, realizing with a final, aching certainty that our family dynamic was permanently fractured. There was no going back to the comfortable, polite illusions we used to hide behind. The following morning brought another direct obstacle. My phone buzzed aggressively with an incoming call from Eli. I stared at the screen in mild surprise, watching his name flash repeatedly before I finally swiped the green button and brought the device to my ear. "Amanda," Eli said, his voice hard, defensive, and entirely devoid of any warmth. "Madison told me you sent another legal warning to her studio address yesterday. She is a nervous wreck. If you try to pull any sort of public stunt at our wedding ceremony this weekend, I will personally ensure that you are physically removed from the premises by hotel security." I gripped the phone tightly, my knuckles turning white against the plastic casing. "Eli, you are marrying a woman who forged my signature on psychological assessments," I said, keeping my voice cold and steady. "She manufactured a fake evaluation about your daughter 4 days before she ever conducted a private session. Using a stray paragraph you foolishly sent her during a moment of panic." Eli went completely silent on the other end of the line. The ambient sound of office chatter drifted softly through his speaker before he spoke again, his tone dropping into a dangerous, defensive register. "Madison already explained that entire misunderstanding to me," Eli snapped, his voice tight with stubborn denial. "She said she consulted with you informally, and that you gave her those forms to help manage Sophie's behavioral outbursts. You are just trying to sabotage our happiness because you cannot stand seeing her succeed. Do not show your face at the wedding, Amanda. You are not welcome." The call disconnected abruptly with a sharp electronic beep. I lowered the phone from my ear, letting out a long, slow breath. Eli had chosen his narrative. He wanted the peaceful, uncomplicated illusion of a happy family so badly that he was actively willing to ignore the glaring structural cracks staring him directly in the face. He preferred to believe I was a jealous, malicious sister rather than accept that the woman sharing his bed was a calculated fraudster. 2 days passed in a blur of quiet preparation. I reviewed the final forensic image reports from Naomi, verified that the state prosecutors had officially received our evidentiary package, and packed the physical items into a sturdy, elegant dark green gift box. The packaging looked entirely normal, wrapped in heavy silver paper and topped with a crisp white satin bow. Anyone walking past the gift table at the reception would assume it was just another expensive wedding present from a distant relative. On the morning of the wedding, the sky over Lake Haven hung heavy with low, bruised gray clouds, promising a cold, miserable drizzle. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, zipping up a simple, elegant dark blue silk dress. I applied minimal makeup, brushed my hair back into a clean, professional ponytail, and slipped my feet into a pair of comfortable leather heels. I did not look like a woman going to war. I looked like a corporate compliance manager attending a mandatory business obligation. Driving downtown, the city streets felt quiet and subdued under the damp autumn drizzle. The luxury hotel hosting the reception featured soaring glass windows, manicured boxwood hedges, and a grand ballroom decorated with thousands of white roses and flickering crystal chandeliers. I parked my car in the subterranean garage, adjusted the strap of my leather shoulder bag, and reached into the back seat to retrieve the heavy silver-wrapped gift box. The surface felt cool and smooth against my bare palms. Taking the elevator up to the main ballroom foyer, the rich smell of roasted prime rib, damp floral arrangements, and expensive French champagne drifted warmly through the double doors. A string quartet stationed near the entrance was playing a soft, classical arrangement of a popular pop ballad. Guests dressed in expensive evening gowns and tailored tuxedos were mingling near the bar, laughing and raising crystal flutes to celebrate the union of Madison and Eli. Across the crowded room, I spotted my mother standing near the head table, wearing a silver silk dress and chatting animatedly with several aunts. Walking steadily across the polished hardwood floor, I made my way directly toward the gift table positioned near the base of the elevated stage. A large decorative wooden sign resting on an easel read, "Welcome to the Warren family." Several large gift bags, crystal vases, and designer boxes were already piled neatly across the white linen tablecloth. I stepped forward, lifted the heavy silver box I was carrying, and placed it securely in the exact center of the table, right under the watchful, high-definition lens of the professional videographer's primary camera tripod. My heart hammered a steady, powerful rhythm against my ribs, but my hands remained entirely steady. I did not sneak around. I did not hide in a corner. I simply set the box down, smoothed the satin ribbon with my fingertips, and turned around to find my sister standing directly behind me. Madison looked breathtaking in an expensive, form-fitting white lace gown, her blonde hair styled in intricate cascading curls. But the moment her dark eyes locked onto my face, the radiant, practiced bridal smile vanished instantly from her lips. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking stark and rigid against the white lace. "What are you doing here?" Madison hissed, stepping forward and grabbing the silver-wrapped box by its outer edge as if the mere presence of the package would contaminate her entire wedding. I smiled softly, keeping my voice low, clear, and completely devoid of any malice. "It is a wedding gift, Madison," I said, looking directly into her wide, panicked eyes. "You really should open it. You have absolutely no idea what is inside." For one suspended second, Madison did nothing. Her fingers remained hooked beneath the silver ribbon, but she made no attempt to untie it. The confidence she had worn across the ballroom disappeared, replaced by the sharp calculation I had seen inside her studio. She was not wondering what I had brought. She was trying to decide how much I knew. Her gaze moved from the box to my handbag, then toward the camera positioned above the gift table. The small red recording light continued blinking. "You were told not to come," she said quietly. "I was told you wanted me silent," I replied. "That is not the same thing." A few guests closest to the stage stopped talking. Madison noticed them immediately. Her shoulders straightened, and the frightened woman in front of me vanished beneath the polished expression of the wellness coach who had built a career by controlling how other people interpreted a room. She lifted the box slightly, testing its weight. "What is this supposed to be?" she asked. "One last opportunity." Her grip tightened around the paper. "For what?" "To tell Eli the truth before someone else does." The bridal smile returned, but it did not reach her eyes. She glanced toward the head table, where Eli had begun watching us with open concern. Sophie remained seated several places away, her body rigid, her attention fixed on the box. Madison lowered her voice. "You think you can walk into my wedding with some folder from your lawyer and frighten me? I did not come to frighten you." "Then leave. Open it." Her expression hardened. For a moment, I thought she might obey. She could have lifted the lid, read the declaration, and taken Eli somewhere private. She could have admitted she used my forms, withdrawn the false report, and stopped adding new lies to the ones already preserved by the platform. Instead, she pulled the box against her gown as if preparing to throw it away. That was when our mother noticed us and started pushing through the guests. Our mother Linda hurried over from the head table, her silver silk dress swishing frantically. Her face was contorted with anxiety and immediate anger. "Amanda, what on earth is wrong with you?" Linda demanded, grabbing Madison's arm to pull her back. "Why do you have to make a scene on your sister's wedding day? Take your box and leave right now, before you ruin everything." I did not flinch, nor did I raise my voice to match her hysteria. I simply kept my posture upright, my eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. "I am not making a scene, Mom. I am simply delivering a present. Let the bride open it. She might learn something useful about her own business model." Madison's breath hitched. She looked down at the box, her fingers trembling against the heavy silver ribbon. She knew what that package represented. It was not a toaster or a set of crystal wine glasses. It was the physical boundary line of a deception that had spiraled completely out of control. Panic flickered across her face, replaced instantly by a sharp, defensive fury. She turned to her groom, her voice pitching up to carry across the nearest dining tables. "Eli, look at her. She is doing this out of pure jealousy. She has hated me ever since I built my wellness brand. Anything she told you is an absolute lie." Eli Warren stood up slowly from his seat at the center of the head table. At 42, the widower looked exhausted, carrying the heavy weight of a man who desperately wanted a quiet, uncomplicated life for himself and his daughter. He looked back and forth between his new bride and me, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. "Amanda," Eli said, his voice cutting through the rising murmurs of the room. "What is going on? What did you warn me about earlier?" I did not step back. I kept my forearms resting lightly against the edge of the gift table, my expression entirely unreadable. I did not raise my voice, but every single word carried effortlessly through the tense silence of the ballroom. "Ask her whether she ever used my name on a document about Sophie," I said clearly. Madison reacted with explosive speed. Her face flushed a dark, furious crimson, and she stepped away from the table, abandoning all corporate composure and public polish. "I was only doing the evaluation the way Amanda told me to," Madison shouted, her voice echoing off the high ceiling of the ballroom. "She gave me those forms." The ballroom fell dead silent. The string quartet stationed near the entrance stopped playing mid-note. 200 pairs of eyes snapped toward the head table. Eli turned his head slowly, staring down at his bride with a look of absolute bewilderment. So Amanda did not write it? Madison caught her breath, realizing with absolute horror the massive verbal trap she had just sprung upon herself. She tried to backtrack instantly, stammering that I had given her informal guidance months ago, but the damage was already done. In her desperate bid to push the blame onto me, she had just publicly confirmed before 200 witnesses and a rolling camera that she was the author of the evaluation and that she had utilized my professional forms. I reached smoothly into my leather handbag, pulled out the formal declaration signed under penalty of perjury, and laid it flat on the white tablecloth. I stepped back, letting the documents speak for themselves. The declaration stated clearly under penalty of perjury that while I knew Sophie as my future brother-in-law's daughter, I had never interviewed, evaluated, or supervised any clinical session regarding her in any professional capacity whatsoever. At the far end of the head table, 15-year-old Sophie stood up from her chair. She did not look at her stepmother, nor did she look at the shocked guests staring in her direction. She walked steadily across the hardwood floor, bypassed the gift table entirely, and headed straight for the metal trash can where Madison had tossed the original box weeks ago. She reached inside, lifted the heavy silver box out into the open, and carried it back across the room, placing it directly into her father's hands. Eli's hand shook slightly as he lifted the lid. He pulled out the white envelope addressed in my handwriting, tore it open, and unfolded the paper inside. His eyes raced across the text. He read the timestamp metadata showing unmistakably that the psychosocial summary had been generated 4 days before Madison ever sat down alone with Sophie. Madison shrieked, pointing a shaking, manicured finger directly at the teenager. "She is a liar. She is emotionally unstable, and you know it. Look at what she wrote in her own diary." I stepped forward, my voice cutting through her desperate accusations like cold steel. "How did you know what was written in her diary, Madison?" "Sophie never showed it to you." Madison turned frantically toward her fiancé, desperate to close the loop of her own collapsing narrative. "You sent me the picture," she cried out to Eli, her voice cracking in wild panic. "You sent me the page because you were worried about her. Do not let her twist that." The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Eli stared at his bride in absolute horror. The color drained completely from his face, leaving him looking hollowed out. Months ago, after a severe argument in the kitchen, he had found his daughter's journal open on the counter and snapped a single photograph of the exposed page out of sheer, misguided parental panic. He had sent it to Madison because she promised to ask me for advice as a professional. He had never imagined, not for a single second, that Madison would take that private moment of teenage vulnerability and weaponize it into a fabricated medical report to drive a wedge between a father and his child. Eli reached up with trembling fingers, unclipped the small wireless microphone from his tuxedo lapel, and dropped it onto the floor with a dull, heavy thud. He looked down at Sophie, his eyes shining with unshed tears of profound regret. Then he turned his back on Madison completely. "The wedding is over," Eli announced into the quiet room, his voice heavy with crushing guilt. He walked down the length of the head table, knelt beside his daughter, and whispered an apology so raw and broken that everyone sitting at the front tables could hear every word. Madison screamed, losing every ounce of her carefully curated poise. She grabbed her bridal bouquet and hurled it violently across the room, sending white roses scattering across the floor. "You ruined my life," she shrieked, staring directly at me with unadulterated hatred. "You took everything from me." I looked at her without a trace of satisfaction, speaking the final truth of the evening. "No. I gave you a chance to tell the truth before the truth arrived without me." The videographer's primary camera kept rolling, capturing every single frame of the absolute collapse. As I turned and walked toward the exit doors, my phone vibrated sharply in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a new message from Naomi Chen flashing across the bright digital screen. "The platform found 7 more client files under your name," the text read. The investigation was no longer just about a family drama or a manipulated teenager. The door to a much larger criminal investigation had just opened, and there was nothing left to stop it. The morning after the wedding, the pale autumn light struggled through the heavy gray clouds hanging over downtown Lake Haven. Sitting alone at my kitchen table, the silence of the house felt absolute. My phone rested beside a cold cup of coffee, vibrating intermittently with notifications from family group chats that I chose to ignore entirely. Naomi Chen had sent a brief morning update reminding me that the legal framework was holding firm. The preservation orders had successfully locked down every digital footprint, and the wellness platform had officially frozen Madison's account, pending a comprehensive internal audit. Within 48 hours of the aborted ceremony, the edited video clips of Madison shouting accusations at the head table began circulating through our extended family network. Linda called twice during the morning hours, but letting the phone ring out to voicemail felt like a necessary act of self-preservation. Our mother was desperately trying to orchestrate damage control, demanding that I issue a public statement clearing her youngest daughter's name. I deleted her frantic messages without listening to them. Silence was no longer a passive reaction. It was a calculated strategy, giving the legal system the uninterrupted space it required to do its work. By late November, the administrative inquiry from the State Licensing Board formally concluded its preliminary phase regarding my old clinic closure. I spent 2 hours answering questions from an investigator in a sterile conference room, detailing the exact logistical challenges of moving physical records during Linda's recovery period. Because I had left legacy backup drives in a residential garage without strict cryptographic erasure protocols, the board issued a formal administrative reprimand concerning my record retention practices. It was a humbling pill to swallow, acknowledging that my own past administrative shortcuts had inadvertently provided the materials Madison later exploited. I accepted the reprimand without protest, signing the paperwork and completing the required compliance refresher course within a week. Owning that minor failure only strengthened my overall position, proving to the regulatory authorities that my commitment to absolute accountability was genuine. As December arrived, the scope of the investigation expanded far beyond a simple family dispute. Naomi called me into her downtown office on a freezing Tuesday afternoon to review the expanding ledger of corporate fraud. The wellness platform's legal compliance team had finished scanning their entire client database, cross-referencing every single psychological summary generated under Madison's corporate umbrella. The numbers laid out across the glass conference table were staggering. Across the previous 18 months, exactly 8 distinct client files had utilized my state license number and forged administrative signature to authenticate high-priced coaching and therapeutic packages. Rachel was only the first victim to step forward before her custody hearing. 3 other clients had discovered that their psychological summaries were submitted into messy divorce proceedings and child custody battles, each document carrying my stolen credentials and the telltale typographical error in the header where the word assessment was missing a vital letter. Madison had not merely stolen my professional identity out of casual envy. She had built a lucrative commercial engine upon a foundation of systematic medical impersonation. She had charged premium fees to vulnerable individuals seeking legitimate psychological guidance, assuring them that a licensed clinical professional was directly supervising their treatment plans. The winter holidays passed in a quiet, isolated blur. Eli reached out to me once, right before Christmas, sending a short, halting text message asking if he could bring Sophie over for a brief conversation. I agreed, meeting them at a neutral coffee shop downtown. Eli looked hollowed out, carrying the visible weight of a man whose illusions had been shattered completely. He admitted that he had finally read through the full forensic timeline Naomi had compiled. He saw the undeniable metadata proving that the psychosocial summary about his daughter had been drafted 4 days before Madison ever sat down for a private conversation with the teenager. He did not ask for forgiveness, and I did not offer any empty platitudes. He simply thanked me for protecting Sophie from being shipped away to an out-of-state residential facility, acknowledging that his own desperate desire for a quiet family life had blinded him to the emotional abuse happening right under his own roof. Sophie was healing slowly, attending independent counseling sessions every week without interference. The deposit for the therapeutic boarding school had been fully refunded after Eli demanded a cancellation the moment the wedding collapsed. She still carried the invisible scars of having her private journal entries weaponized against her. But the heavy defensive wall around her spirit had begun to soften. We shared hot chocolate across a small wooden table, talking about school projects and art classes instead of legal briefs and forged signatures. By January of the new year, the state prosecutor's office officially stepped in, transforming the civil licensing inquiry into a formal criminal investigation. Naomi called me with the news on a crisp Monday morning, her voice brisk and professional. The district attorney had reviewed the digital trail, the platform payment logs, and the sworn statements from the affected clients. They were preparing to hand down multiple felony counts of identity theft, criminal simulation, and fraudulent business practices. Madison made one final, desperate attempt to control the narrative before the criminal indictments became public record. She hired a high-priced defense attorney who attempted to frame the entire fiasco as an innocent, familial misunderstanding between 2 sisters who had shared administrative resources in the past. Her legal team tried to argue that I had given tacit, informal permission for her to use my template files during the early stages of her coaching venture, leaning heavily on the fact that I had left those cardboard boxes in our mother's garage 2 years prior. Naomi dismantled their defense strategy within 48 hours. She submitted the server access logs showing that Madison had actively attempted to delete cloud backups and reset her electronic devices immediately after receiving our initial preservation notice. Furthermore, the internal emails recovered from the platform's corporate archives completely destroyed any illusion of an innocent misunderstanding. One specific email printed out in Naomi's office featured Madison writing directly to a platform administrator months before the wedding. The words stared up from the paper with absolute clarity. Use Amanda's number for now. Once the program is established, no one will ask where it came from. There was no ambiguity left in the evidence. Madison had acted with premeditated, calculated intent, viewing my professional reputation as a temporary stepping stone to be exploited and discarded. The winter months bled into early spring as the legal machinery ground forward toward a definitive resolution. In March, the district attorney formally filed the criminal charges, and Madison's defense counsel realized they had no viable path to an acquittal. A trial would only expose the full breadth of her systematic fraud to the public eye, destroying any remaining possibility of future employment in the wellness industry. Negotiations for a plea agreement began during the final week of March. Naomi kept me informed of every incremental development, ensuring that my perspective, as the primary victim of the identity theft, was fully represented in the discussions. Madison's attorney pushed hard for a completely suspended sentence with probation, arguing that her lack of a prior criminal record warranted leniency. The prosecutor flatly rejected that proposal, pointing to the active harm inflicted on vulnerable families and individuals whose custody battles had been compromised by forged medical documents. By April, a formal plea deal was hammered out and signed by all parties involved. Madison agreed to plead guilty to multiple counts of unauthorized use of professional credentials and fraudulent misrepresentation in exchange for the dropping of more severe grand larceny charges. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for a bright Friday morning in late May, inside a quiet, sunlit courtroom downtown. The public gallery was mostly empty, save for Naomi and me sitting quietly near the front row. Linda had chosen not to attend, finally realizing that her presence would only serve to complicate a reality she could no longer deny. When Madison walked into the courtroom wearing a stark gray jumpsuit, her posture was rigid and defensive. The effortless, glowing aura of the boutique wellness coach had completely evaporated. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a simple, severe band, and she avoided making eye contact with anyone in the gallery as she sat beside her privately retained defense attorney. The judge presided over the proceedings with a stern, measured demeanor, reviewing the extensive packet of forensic evidence, financial records, and victim impact statements submitted by Rachel and the other affected clients. The legal arguments proceeded efficiently without unnecessary theatrical flair. When the time came for victim input, I stood up from my seat and walked slowly to the podium. The microphone picked up the quiet rustle of my notes, though I did not need to read from them. I looked directly toward the bench before shifting my gaze briefly to where my sister sat, staring fixedly at the polished wooden table. I did not deliver an emotional tirade, nor did I raise my voice to demand vengeance. I spoke with the calm, steady authority of a compliance professional, outlining a critical operational failure. I explained to the court that my professional name and license number represented 10 years of rigorous academic training, ethical oversight, and public trust. I noted that Madison had weaponized that trust for personal financial gain, transforming sacred medical credentials into a commercial weapon that harmed innocent strangers and terrorized a 15-year-old child. "I chose the people you hurt," I said softly into the microphone, my words carrying clearly across the quiet courtroom. "You stopped being a victim the moment you turned my name into a weapon. I am not asking the court to ruin her entire life, but I am asking for absolute protection for the public, strict restitution for every client she defrauded, and a permanent legal barrier preventing her from ever claiming a clinical credential she did not earn." The judge listened intently, nodding slowly as I returned to my seat beside Naomi. When the final sentence was formally handed down, it struck a careful balance between accountability and legal precedent for a first-time white-collar offender. Madison received a 30-day term of short-term shock incarceration in the county detention center, ensuring she experienced the direct penal consequences of her criminal choices. Following her release from custody, she was sentenced to 6 months of strict electronic home confinement, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. The remainder of any potential jail time was fully suspended on the strict condition that she complied with every term of the judgment. Additionally, the court ordered mandatory financial restitution to every client who had paid for services under false pretenses, covering the full cost of their legal fees and psychological counseling. A permanent injunction barred Madison from providing clinical services, representing herself as a licensed professional, or operating any coaching program that claimed clinical or therapeutic oversight without formal regulatory approval. Her entire digital footprint, including the website for the Repaired Family and all associated social media accounts, was ordered to be permanently scrubbed and transferred to state regulatory oversight for compliance verification. As the bailiff prepared to escort Madison from the courtroom to begin processing her sentence, she turned her head sharply toward the gallery. Her dark eyes locked onto mine with a final flash of bitter resentment. "You always needed to be the good sister," Madison whispered bitterly, her voice carrying just enough for me to hear before the heavy wooden side door swung shut behind her. I did not flinch, nor did I offer a parting retort. I simply sat still in my seat, letting the heavy oak door close completely. In that quiet, sunlit courtroom, a profound realization settled deep into my bones. The race to prove who was smarter, more talented, or more favored in the eyes of our family was an entirely empty competition. I no longer needed Madison to validate my worth, nor did I need our mother's approval to justify my boundaries. Leaving the courthouse with Naomi, the warm spring air felt crisp and clean against my face. The legal battle was officially closed, the evidentiary trail was secured, and the institutional records had been systematically corrected. By late June, the wellness platform had completed its administrative overhaul, notifying all impacted clients that their files had been audited, corrected, and cleared of any unauthorized oversight. Rachel successfully resolved her custody dispute using the verified court documentation proving that the psychological summary submitted by her ex-husband was an absolute forgery manufactured by an unlicensed coach. Sophie finished her school term with honors, her focus returning entirely to her art projects and her relationships with friends. Her father Eli continued attending his own private counseling sessions, slowly rebuilding the fractured trust between himself and his daughter through consistent, quiet actions rather than empty promises. Their household had grown noticeably calmer, stripped of the artificial therapeutic jargon and manipulative wellness frameworks that had nearly torn them apart. Linda tried twice during the early summer. The first message arrived on a Tuesday morning while the compliance department break room hummed with a machine spitting out scorched water disguised as coffee. My phone vibrated against the counter. I saw my mother's name on the screen and left it dark for several seconds. The trial had ended 6 weeks earlier. Madison accepted her sentence once platform records, client statements, forged assessments, payment trails, and device logs left zero room for defense. The professional board cleared me completely. Civil claims crawled through their final administrative stages. Yet my family clung to the belief that a court order erased history and restored everyone to old positions. I unlocked the screen. 3 long paragraphs about forgiveness, family unity, and losing both daughters at once filled the display. Linda wrote that she woke every morning feeling torn apart. She claimed Madison paid for mistakes while I punished her a second time by refusing to visit. Then came the line that nearly worked. She wrote that she was losing me too. For most of my life, my mother kept a mental catalog of the exact words needed to unlock the oldest parts of me. She never needed direct accusations. She only had to paint herself as abandoned, and I would instantly audit every boundary I set like a crime scene investigator. Was I too hard? Was I acting from anger instead of principle? Had I turned so defensive that I was hurting someone who never forged my name or defrauded vulnerable clients? I stood by the humming coffee machine and read the words again. The underlying architecture became obvious on the second pass. Madison crimes occupied 2 sentences. My refusal to forgive took up the rest of the page. Linda equated Madison stealing my identity and manufacturing clinical documents about a child with my decision to stay away from family reconciliation counseling. In my mother ledger, those actions sat on opposite sides of the exact same scale. I locked the phone without replying. The coffee machine beeped. I filled my mug, walked back to my office, and spent the morning auditing vendor files. For years, silence functioned as my family favorite weapon whenever guilt was required. Someone stopped calling, stopped inviting me, or sat through dinner wearing a wounded expression until I apologized for the tension. This time, silence carried no punishment. It was simply the absence of permission. I refused to let my mother make me responsible for the fallout of Madison choices. The second message arrived nearly 3 weeks later. By then, Madison finished the incarceration portion of her sentence and transitioned to electronic home confinement at Linda House under strict court supervision. She could only leave for approved legal appointments, required treatment, community service, and board-approved employment. Her studio was gone. Heal Your Roots closed days after the platform public correction. Gold lettering vanished from the front window. The landlord changed the locks after learning Madison could no longer run a wellness business from the property. Remaining furniture, unopened candle shipments, and branded journals were sold to cover back rent. Linda's second message ignored all of that. She invited me to a Sunday family dinner. Madison was home, she wrote, and had suffered enough. We could sit around the same table, acknowledge that mistakes happened, and begin again. The phrase lingered. Mistakes had been made. No subject, no ownership, zero indication of who committed the harm or who suffered the damage. I read the text twice and dialed her number. Linda answered on the second ring. Amanda. She sounded surprised, almost relieved. I received your invitation. I hoped you would. Her voice softened. I know this has been difficult for everyone. I am not coming. The warmth vanished instantly. You have not even heard what I wanted to say. You want us to sit down, label Madison crimes as mere mistakes, and pretend the family resets to 0. That is not fair. It is exactly what you wrote. Linda released a slow breath. I could picture her standing in the kitchen, hand pressed against the counter, bracing herself to handle her difficult older daughter. Amanda. She is still your sister. She used my license to defraud vulnerable people. She fabricated a psychological assessment about a 15-year-old girl. She tried to bargain with Sophie's safety to protect her business. She admitted she was wrong. She admitted what physical evidence already proved. She lost everything. No, I said. She lost things built with stolen credentials. Those things were never hers to begin with. Silence stretched across the line. I heard the faint ticking of the clock hanging above her kitchen doorway. The same one from our childhood mornings when Madison and I ate cereal while our mother braided Madison hair and told me to pack my own lunch. I spent years believing Linda loved us differently because Madison required more attention. Eventually, I realized that endless need became a permanent exemption from accountability. You sound pleased, Linda muttered. I am not pleased. You wanted her business destroyed. I wanted her to stop using my identity. You wanted everyone to know what she did. I wanted the people she harmed to know those documents were false. You wanted to win. That accusation exposed what my mother believed all along. In Linda's mind, the entire ordeal was a competition between sisters. One daughter suffered public exposure, while the other received public vindication. Because I won, I owed her grace. This was never a contest. It felt like one to Madison. I am not responsible for the story she tells herself. She says you always believed you were better than her. I believed I was more qualified than she was to provide clinical services. I was right. You see? You cannot help yourself. My hand tightened around the plastic phone casing. Years ago, that comment dragged me straight into an argument. I would have listed differences between proper education and a weekend certificate, explaining professional standards, duty of care, informed consent, and legal liabilities. I no longer needed to prove any of it. The state board already did that work for me. I did not call to debate Madison's opinion of me, I said. I called to outline what contact with me looks like from now on. Linda remained silent. I am willing to have one phone call with you each month. You can ask about my work, tell me about your health, or discuss ordinary parts of your life. But you cannot defend Madison, pressure me to forgive her, carry messages between us, or demand another performance of family harmony. And if I bring her up, I will end the call. That sounds cruel. It is a boundary, Mom. You spent years confusing the two. Her breathing changed. Tears were close. My familiar instinct flared, whispering at me to soften the sentence, add an exception, or reassure her that she had not lost me completely. Instead, I stayed quiet. Linda taught me that discomfort meant an emergency whenever Madison felt upset. I taught myself that discomfort could simply mean information. You are making me choose between my daughters. No, I choose what I participate in. You remain entirely free to have a relationship with Madison. You know she lives here. Yes, you know I cannot pretend she does not exist. I am not asking you to. Then what am I supposed to do? Hide her every time you call? Speak to me without trying to make me responsible for her recovery. Long quiet filled the line before she spoke again. Her voice sounded smaller. I do not know how to do this. It was the first honest sentence she uttered. For a single second, I saw past the manipulation. I saw a woman who spent decades managing household conflict by protecting whoever generated the loudest chaos. She built her identity around keeping Madison calm and keeping me useful. Without those fixed roles, she lacked the framework to be our mother. You can learn, I said. Will you help me? I will talk to you. I will not do the work for you. That is not the same thing. No, it is not. She did not accept the terms gracefully. She asked if the restriction lasted forever, accused me of weaponizing professional language to dodge emotions, and insisted families needed to tackle difficult subjects. Difficult subjects were welcome, I noted. Pressure, excuses, and emotional blackmail were banned. Before ending the call, she asked one final question. Do you still love her? I looked out my office window at the parking lot below. Employees walked between buildings carrying bags, coffee cups, and lunch containers. Ordinary people moving through an ordinary day. I do not know what I feel about Madison anymore, I answered. But love does not require access. Linda started crying. I did not hang up immediately. I stayed on the line while she collected herself, offering no apologies for her tears and holding the boundary firm. When the call finished, I wrote the date on a small note beside my desk calendar. 1 month. For the first time, my mother understood my conditions were not opening bids in a negotiation. They were final. Sophie finished the school year with honors. When she texted a picture of her report card, her thumb covered her last name, a habit formed during the investigation, after seeing private data copied into unauthorized documents. The gesture lasted a second before she caught herself, moved her thumb, and sent a fresh photo. That tiny correction hit me harder than the straight as. Eli continued individual counseling. At first, he approached therapy like a work problem, demanding timelines, measurable goals, and clear metrics for improvement. He wanted a precise timestamp marking when he became a father who ignored his daughter's fear and swapped it out for a stranger narrative. His therapist told him no single point existed. Dozens of smaller choices added up. He dismissed Sophie when she resisted Madison living room sessions. He accepted clinical jargon he never understood because it saved him from deciding whether his daughter's anger was valid. He allowed Madison to frame grief as pathology because he wanted their blended family repaired before anyone healed. Eli told me about it during a brief courthouse hallway conversation after sentencing. He asked for zero reassurance. I wanted Madison to be right, he said. Because if she was right, Sophie was the problem, and problems can be treated. And if Madison was wrong? I asked. Then I brought danger straight into our house. He looked older, graying near the temples. The exhaustion etched across his face no longer stemmed from confusion. It came from understanding. What do I do with that? He asked. I do not know. He nodded. Admitting ignorance mattered. Throughout the investigation, I acted as the resident expert who understood paperwork, licensing rules, platform structures, and legal frameworks. That knowledge was necessary, but it did not qualify me to fix a father-daughter bond fractured by betrayal. Eli began attending Sophie family therapy sessions only when Sophie agreed to let him join. The first 2 meetings lasted under 30 minutes. During the opening session, Sophie accused him of choosing Madison over her. Eli tried explaining that he genuinely believed the psychological assessments were legitimate. Sophie stood up and walked out. The therapist forced Eli to sit alone in the empty room for the remainder of the hour. He later admitted that staring at an empty chair taught him more than any lecture could. In the second session, Sophie confessed she still suffered nightmares about waking up enrolled in an out-of-state residential program under paperwork carrying my name. Eli started to say he never would have allowed that. Then he stopped himself. He nearly signed the preliminary intake forms. Instead of defending an idealized version of himself, he looked at her and said, "You are right to be afraid of what I almost did." Sophie stayed for the rest of the hour. Their relationship did not mend overnight. Some weeks she ate dinner with him and watched foreign films he clearly hated. Other weeks she stayed with a friend family and answered his check-ins with a single word. Sometimes she refused to step inside the kitchen because that was where she first saw the forged assessment glowing on Madison's laptop. Eli stopped asking when she would move past it. When Sophie laughed, he stopped calling it progress. When she grew quiet, he stopped labeling it regression. He let her emotions belong to her. In July, Sophie invited me back to the coffee shop where our first conversation failed. Same place. Better conversation? I stared at the text before replying. I would like that. The shop remained unchanged. Brass bells chimed when I pushed the door open. The air carried notes of roasted beans, cinnamon, and warm dough. Students crowded the window table, while a tired barista scribbled names on paper cups. Sophie sat in the back corner. She picked the exact same table. For a heartbeat, past and present blurred. I pictured the exhausted 15-year-old clutching a cracked phone while I interrogated her like a hostile witness. Then Sophie looked up. Dark circles vanished from beneath her eyes. A red cloth band held back her hair, and a smudge of graphite stained the side of her hand. A small sketchbook lay open next to an iced tea. She still watched the entrance whenever the door opened, but she no longer looked like someone waiting to be dragged away. I got into the summer art program, she announced the moment I sat down. I knew you would. She narrowed her eyes. You did not even know I applied. I knew when you sent a picture of your portfolio folder. You noticed that? I noticed paperwork. Sophie laughed, a genuine sound unburdened by fear or permission-seeking. Dad says he knew too, she added. Did he? No. But he is trying. Bitterness was absent from her tone, though forgiveness remained unearned. She spun the sketchbook around to show a drawing of two hands gripping opposite sides of a torn sheet of paper. The fingers were rendered with sharp clarity, but the torn edge between them remained rough and unfinished. What is it called? I asked. I do not know yet. It looks like an argument. It is supposed to be repair. I studied the lines again. Repair can look like an argument. That is what my teacher said. She closed the book and traced a water droplet sliding down her glass. I am still angry with him, she murmured. Sometimes he acts like counseling means we bounce right back to normal. You do not owe anyone normal. He keeps saying he understands if I need time. That sounds better. It is. But sometimes I think he is just waiting for a timer to run out. The heavy honesty settled between us. You do not owe anyone forgiveness on a schedule, I told her. Sophie searched my face. Not even family? Especially not family. Her shoulders dropped several inches, as if an invisible weight slid off her frame. She looked out the window at passing cars. Madison wrote to me, she said. My body locked up. When? Last month. Her lawyer sent the letter through Dad first. What did it say? That she was sorry I misunderstood her intentions. I closed my eyes for a second. Did you read the rest? No. What did he do? He asked if I wanted it. I said no. He shredded it. Triumph was missing from her voice, replaced entirely by quiet relief. That was the right call, I said. I told him I did not want another apology explaining why she hurt me. That is not an apology. I know. A server dropped off my coffee without verbal interruption, giving us both space to breathe. When the server walked away, Sophie's eyes dropped to my hands. You always hold your cup like that, she noted. Like what? Both hands. Even when it burns. I looked down. She was right. I used to do it during the sessions at home, she continued. When Madison talked about you, she claimed you needed something heavy in your hands because you were emotionally guarded. Irritation flared. Madison twisted my ordinary habits into clinical diagnostics. I hold it with both hands because I spill things, I said. Sophie smiled. The moment was small, yet vital. Not every behavior required interpretation, and not every preference demanded a clinical label. Sometimes a person simply held a mug with two hands because she mistrusted her grip. I reached across the table, pausing before making contact. During our first meeting, I treated boundaries as cold walls. I knew better now. I owe you another apology, I said quietly. When you first showed up, I treated you like evidence needing verification instead of a frightened kid asking an adult for help. You believed me eventually. I should have believed you sooner. You needed proof. I needed proof for a courtroom. I did not need proof to show you basic compassion. Sophie looked down at her sketchbook. I spoke before retreating behind professional armor. I was afraid. If your documents were real, my license was compromised. If they were fake, my sister committed a crime. I hid behind process because I lacked the courage to face either reality. You sounded like a detective. Worse than a detective, I admitted. What did I sound like? A customer service robot. I laughed despite myself, and Sophie's mouth curved upward. Her expression softened, turning serious once more. You believed me when it mattered, she said. That does not erase how it started, but it matters. It was not absolution, but it was honest. We stayed for nearly 2 hours while she showed me sketches from her art program, featuring doors, windows, and objects hidden beneath draped fabric. One drawing showed a dark green box sitting in the center of a crowded ballroom with its lid shut tight, while faceless guests milled around it. What is inside? I asked. I have not decided. That is fair. When we stood to leave, Sophie initiated a brief hug before adjusting her bag strap and heading toward the door. The brass bell chimed behind her. I remained by the table, wrapping my hands around my empty ceramic mug. My professional life found its footing too. Colleagues assumed I would return to clinical practice once the state board cleared my name. Hospital administrators offered consulting roles, and Naomi lawyer friends suggested reopening my office would send a powerful public statement. For a brief window, I believed them. Returning felt like proof that Madison failed to steal my career. I imagined installing a fresh nameplate outside an office door, drafting new client intake forms, and setting up encrypted servers. Naomi advised caution. "You are allowed to make choices that are not purely symbolic," she noted during a visit to her office. Every reason I gave her was rooted in the past tense. I missed the certainty of the title. Licensed clinical social worker was an identity built on years of rigorous education and supervised hours. When Madison weaponized it, she disrupted the story I told myself about who I was. Reopening my practice would have restored that old narrative. Yet doing things purely to prove someone wrong meant letting them dictate my direction anyway. I preferred compliance work. I liked tracing system failures to their roots, designing safety controls, and translating complex regulations into practical procedures. The work lacked intimacy, but it carried deep value. My supervisor called me into her office one afternoon with a proposal for a new credential verification program. The company examined Madison breach and recognized industry-wide vulnerabilities. Professional license numbers were too easily scraped from public databases, and electronic signatures lacked secondary confirmation. "We want you to lead the redesign," my supervisor said. The proposal outlined direct verification links, expiration alerts, and mandatory callbacks before external platforms could link clinicians to commercial products. "This impacts every provider in our network," I noted. "That is the exact point." Irony flickered. Madison exploited an old administrative loophole to run her business, and now that door slammed shut for everyone. I accepted the assignment. I needed no clinic door or brass plaque to prove my qualifications. By late July, the wellness platform finished distributing restitution to verified victims. Amounts varied widely, covering private coaching, online courses, and family packages marketed under false medical pretenses. Rachel received enough to cover legal fees incurred during her custody battle. More importantly, the platform issued a formal notice confirming her assessment was never authored or approved by a licensed professional. Rachel sent a screenshot of the corrected legal filing with a single sentence at the bottom. The judge finally looked at me instead of the paper. Another client, a retired teacher named Gloria, spent months believing she failed Madison program because she resisted healing. Armed with the platform correction, Gloria joined a fraud survivor group and sent Naomi a statement for the civil record. Madison sold us the idea that doubt meant we needed her. Her methods worked because skepticism was reframed as illness. Questioning her authority made a client defensive, unhealed, or unstable. Obedience remained the sole acceptable option. Sophie endured that exact trap. Protests were labeled defiance, withdrawal meant isolation, and anger signaled emotional instability. The state board officially closed my file with zero disciplinary action. The final letter confirmed every forged assessment was identified and scrubbed. I read the paper once and filed it away. For months, I imagined that moment bringing wild relief or vindication. Instead, I just felt tired. The text gave me back nothing new. It merely confirmed my name belonged to me all along. Madison's studio remained shuttered, stripped of commercial credentials, and barred from advertising clinical oversight. Her social media channels vanished, videos were pulled, and local businesses deleted partnership photos. Visibility had been her proof of legitimacy. Once borrowed authority evaporated, nothing solid remained beneath it. Linda mentioned during a monthly call that Madison landed a remote job processing customer returns. I asked for zero details. Linda tested our boundary during our second scheduled chat. "She is having a rough week," Linda started. "Mom, I am not defending her. You are bringing her emotional state into our conversation. I just thought you should know." "I do not need to know. She feels like nobody understands her shame. I am ending the call now. Amanda, wait. We can try next month." I hung up. My hands shook afterward, not from doubt but from the sheer muscle memory required to break a lifetime of enabling habits. The following month, Linda avoided mentioning Madison entirely. We spent 18 minutes discussing her garden, plumbing repairs, and skipped physical therapy exercises. The conversation felt fragile, yet entirely possible. No dramatic showdown happened between Madison and me. For a long time, I expected one. I pictured her waiting by my car or demanding an explanation, leading to a cinematic confrontation where the right sentence made everything click. Reality was far quieter. Naomi called before forwarding a final envelope from Madison Lawyer. "You do not have to read this," Naomi warned. "What does she want?" "She calls it a personal statement, not a legal demand." "Does it contain an apology?" Naomi paused. "Not by any definition I recognize." "Send it." The envelope arrived the next morning. My name was scrawled across the front in Madison, careful, rounded handwriting, the same script she used on childhood birthday cards. I set it on my desk and worked around it for an hour, answering emails and joining video meetings while the envelope sat by my keyboard. Finally, I picked it up. I could have opened it. Instead, I called Naomi. "Read me the first sentence." Paper rustled through the speaker. She writes, "Amanda, I hope one day you are honest with yourself about why you needed to take everything from me. That is enough. There are 4 pages left. I do not need them." Naomi grew quiet. "What do you want me to do with it?" "Return it." Unopened? I opened the outer envelope. "Then I will send the pages back with a formal notice that you withhold consent for any future personal contact. Thank you." Before hanging up, Naomi asked if I knew Madison would interpret my refusal as fear of hearing her side. "I know. Does that bother you?" "Yes." The honest answer surprised us both. "Are you going to read it?" "No." The decision mattered precisely because it bothered me. Boundaries and avoidance looked identical from the outside, but motivation changed everything. I feared no hidden truths in her words. I simply refused to re-enter the courtroom inside her head where my boundaries translated to cruelty and her consequences served as proof of my malice. I could not control her beliefs, but I controlled my participation. One Saturday afternoon in August, I finally tackled the storage closet in my home office. Boxes of tax records, empty equipment crates, and sealed containers from my old practice waited inside. Most clinical files were long since destroyed or transferred per protocol, but physical relics lingered. Unused appointment cards, blank folders, and a framed professional certificate wrapped in brown paper sat on the top shelf. Tucked behind tax files sat the dark green box returned by the hotel after the wedding. I pulled it down and set it on my desk. At the wedding, that box represented everything Madison refused to look at: evidence, consequences, and the line between an actual profession and a costume. She thought throwing it away turned its contents into proof of sisterly jealousy. Only a single item remained inside. I lifted the lid. My polished brass office nameplate rested beneath a sheet of tissue paper. Amanda Pierce, licensed clinical social worker. A faint champagne stain marked the lower corner. I rubbed it with my thumb, watching the discoloration fade into the metal grain. I carried the nameplate to the window. Sunlight washed over the engraved letters. For years, clients and delivery drivers saw that plaque outside my door. To me, it meant responsibility. To Madison, it meant open access. She viewed titles as decorative accessories rather than heavy accountability backed by education and ethics. I remembered helping her pack up boxes when I closed my practice, thanking her for bringing coffee and tape while recovering from surgery. For a long time, guilt poisoned that memory. I blamed myself for failing to secure the old administrative drive. All those self-criticisms were true, but responsibility and blame were distinct concepts. My failure to lock down legacy files did not excuse her choice to steal them. I placed the nameplate on my desk next to my corporate certificates. For a fleeting moment, I considered leaving it there to prove nobody defeated me. Then I realized I was still formatting my life as an argument against her. I yanked open my bottom drawer and slid the nameplate inside, next to the state board clearance letter and court orders. The metal clicked softly against paper. I shut the drawer. The room stayed quiet. Degrees hung on the wall, current projects waited on the screen, and afternoon light warmed the rooftops outside. Nothing needed to be displayed to prove its worth. My phone buzzed on the desk. For a split second, I expected Linda's name. It was Sophie. "Are you busy?" she asked. I was cleaning. "That sounds awful." I need a second opinion. About what? My final art project. A photo popped up on my screen showing a large canvas. The painting depicted a dark green box on a table with its lid thrown open, casting a brilliant light whose source remained hidden. Figures stood around the table, one turning away, another reaching toward the light, and a third watching from the edge. What do you think? Sophie asked. I think the box changed. It did. What is inside? You still cannot see it. I noticed. But now they know they have to look. I leaned back in my chair. What is the title? The Last Chance. Silence stretched before Sophie's nervous voice broke through. It might be too dramatic. No, I said. It is right. You really think so? I do. She mentioned the piece would hang in the program upcoming gallery exhibition. Eli planned to attend, and Sophie granted permission for him to invite a friend, though extended family remained barred. Do you want me there? I asked. Yes. Then I will be there. After hanging up, I finished clearing out the closet, tossing old appointment logs and donating spare office supplies while storing the framed certificate away. By evening, the apartment fell completely still. Not the tense hush following a Madison explosion, but a quiet that asked nothing from me. I stood by my desk, resting a hand against the closed drawer, holding the brass nameplate. It was not hidden away in shame. It was simply finished. Madison threw my gift away, believing unexamined objects lost their power to hurt. She never understood that the box contained her final chance, not my revenge. You may love your family deeply, but love should never require you to ignore harm, excuse fraud, or sacrifice your safety. When someone crosses a boundary, protect the truth, document what happened, and seek qualified help instead of trying to fix everything alone. Accountability is not cruelty, and forgiveness is not something anyone can demand from you. You can admit your own mistakes without accepting blame for another person's choices. Real healing begins when you stop protecting appearances and start protecting people. Have you ever been pressured to forgive someone before they took responsibility? And how did that affect you?